Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see you all back here at the Benson Theater. I'm Lauren Medici. I'm the Director of Engagement Programs for Opera Omaha. I'm delighted to welcome you to our first opera and conversation of the season for X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X. We're delighted to be back here at the wonderful Benson Theater. Hi to everybody who's streaming on YouTube. Thanks for joining us virtually. I am so delighted to be here today and starting conversation about this wonderful opera. We have been in the development process for this and conversations about it. We knew that was going to happen. That's okay. It's just water.
I thought it was going to be me. I'm not going to lie.
See, and now we're happy.
I'm glad I was able to help you out, Ricky.
It had to be someone.
Yes, stick with the bottom.
So we're so excited. This is our first public event, surrounding X, the life and times of Malcolm X, which is the first opera of our 22-23 Opera Omaha season. I am joined up here by our wonderful panel of artists who are part of this creation process and part of this opera. I have right next to me Ronnita Miller, who plays Ella in this opera, or sings Ella in this opera. I have Christopher Davis, who is our story author for the opera, and Rickey Tripp, who's the choreographer for this opera. Those of you who are here, we have bios in front of you, so I'm not going to read all of those because you can read them yourselves. If you're watching online, it's also on our event page for it if you'd like to learn more about the artist that we have in front of us. Because I want to dive in, we have artists who represent, sorry, I'm going to hold this. We have artists who represent really different spaces in the creative process and the development process of this opera. And Christopher, I'd like to start with you because you've been part of this opera the longest. Can you tell us what your role is as a story author for this opera, and a little bit about how long you've been involved with this piece?
Okay. I think that a lot of times people get a little confused about like what a storywriter is when it's involving opera. I think we came at it almost from a tradition of film where you do quite often have a storywriter that precedes the screenplay. My brother Anthony, who's the composer, and I first started talking about doing a piece on Malcolm X back when we were still in college in the mid-70s. I took a course in college in African American autobiography, and one of the works was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I was really impressed with many things about the autobiography. And one was that it really, his personal experience related to the experience of so many different parts of the African American community. You know, whether it was his experience in Michigan, his experience in Boston, his experience in New York. It really, cut across a lot of different parts of our experience. But what struck me at the time when I was in college is how much music was in the piece, how much music was in the autobiography, from his days working the dance halls between Boston and New York. And that the religious transformation that occurs in the autobiography really paralleled for me a lot of what was going on in jazz in the late 50s, early 60s, particularly John Coltrane. And for me and for Anthony at that time, we really felt that there was a connection between the music and this particular life. And I think one of the reasons that I was brought into the project or kept working on the project was that you had a really extensive life that you managed, that we had to try to reduce and to get to a position where it had a dramatic shape to it and that had a specific kind of take on that life. So it was taking all of what we learned about a historical figure and converting it into something that worked as a theatrical piece. And when Tulani came on board, her background early on at that time was primarily as a poet. So she and Anthony had done work together in like a non-theatrical settings of her and Anthony working on putting her words to music. But it was my responsibility in those early days to provide the the theatrical drive and the arc of the character. So that's what it was.
Wonderful, thank you. Rickey, you came into this process a little more recently. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to be involved in this opera and what that role is like for a choreographer coming into this opera creation process?
Sure. I joined the creative team in 2021, right after we did Fire Shut Up in My Bones at the Met. And the choreographer and co-director of that, Camille A. Brown, I believe she may have been attached to this project, but she wasn't available for said project. So she recommended me, and Camille and I had worked with Robert previously on a show called Bella that we did out of town and then in New York City. So that's how I became to be associated with the project. And as a choreographer, you know, the first conversation you have is with your director. Sometimes it's your agent, but but it's the director, to make sure that you understand and get his vision, and then you entangle your own vision with what he or she or they have in mind, and then the process kind of begins. It begins with research, and then you get the dancers in my room, and I figure out starts with the music too. Before that, the music has to inspire me, and this music, it inspires me and challenges me as well. I mean, it's opera, so everything is not in 8 counts, but what I love about Anthony, it's a blessing to be working with Anthony, because he actually, in the back in the day, right, he wrote for dance. Prior to doing the opera, so that was a very helpful thing in terms of how we were going to address this music and how to dance to it. So,
now, Ronnita, I'm going to ask you the same question, but we've talked a little bit about, as a singer, being part of your role in a creation process is really different.
Yes, it is. With this piece, particularly a recently alive person in history, you already are aware of their impact in society, and then you go back and you research and you try to find out more, and then you try to find out the creative process of the storywriter and the composer and what led to the writing of this, so that you can do your best to bring to life all of those processes that came before you when you come on to bring it to life with the conductor, with the dancers, with the ensemble. So, yeah, I mean, I can't remember when they asked me to, probably 2021, I believe, and I was thrilled because this music, unlike a lot of the music I get to sing, is so familiar to me culturally, and it also blends classical music, classical opera, with jazz in such a way that it is so seamless, and it feels very, it's the marriage of what I know from home and what I trained in school. So yeah, it's really interesting just, to come on board and do your own research, and then have the blessing of living story writers and a living composer. That is something that we don't often get. Yeah, to have that conversation and that knowledge.
You bring up this idea of having this familiar influences and a familiar vocabulary, and I know that was a really big part of the creation process. I'll throw it out to any of you who want to speak to that, about that idea of that shared vocabulary and those shared traditions that informed this piece.
Well, it was interesting what Ronnita was saying, because Ella, the character that she plays, is an important transitional figure in the piece, and musically, dramatically, etc. And musically, the opening has been of the piece has been, I would say, both feet in a contemporary opera tradition. And then there's a transition that Ronnita does as Ella, which brings you from that tradition into an African-American jazz tradition. And it happens from when she starts to when she ends. You've been moved from one vocabulary to another vocabulary. And it's not that you're going to stay in this second vocabulary, because there's always movement back and forth. But that's the first big transition that brings you into street, Boston, dance hall, all of that. Is she brings us into that world.
That's an important role to play.
I know.
Wait a minute. Because now I'm going back to like the first stage, and then I'm going, wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know. There's some things that, sometimes you shouldn't let the performers know.
You're keeping secrets over
it's okay.
here.
Listen,
It's okay.
No, it's okay, because I actually feel it, rhythmically
Yeah.
in the music. I'm like, yes.
Okay.
We're home.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Rehearsals
not
start
want me to do
tomorrow,
that?
everybody. So you're gonna see something
Yeah.
totally different here.
Yeah.
So there are creative secrets that are revealed through the piece that you don't really have to state unless you're on a panel, right?
And now you all know.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Ricky, can you talk a little bit about, you talked about having this conversation with the director and being inspired and
Yeah.
thinking about the music, and what does that process look like for you, for your research process, for where you find inspiration as you're choreographing?
Ooh, people on the street, to be very honest with you, because in order for me to make up or create any step, I approach it as a human being, as an actor first. Because if I don't understand the gesture or the action behind it, the step makes no sense to me. But going backwards, having a conversation with Robert, he wanted the dancers, so the show itself, conceptually wise, is forwarding Afrofuturism. And so he wanted the dancers to be of the future, and which is exciting for me, because I didn't get like blocked into like an era, which I don't mind, like a period piece, but thinking about how movement looks in the future was very exciting for me. And so I get to push the envelope with that. And even though the music can feel like it is set in the 30s, I can still use the vernacular, the African-American vernacular, and use that to incorporate it and infuse it, and then bring something else fresher with the whole idea. So so in terms of my inspiration, it's a lot of things that I'm inspired by, and being like, again, doing more research about Malcolm and about his life, and the music itself, and the dancers in the room, and also my life experiences that I bring to it. So I'm influenced by several different things, and there's never one thing that I pull from. It's always everything. Life is informing me, and that's how I come up with my steps.
That's great.
Thank you.
So thinking about this piece and the long life that it's had, and what that, because Ricky mentioned that Afrofuturism, and that's the inspiration for this production right now. How do you feel like that, contrast with the original vision 35 years ago?
Okay. I think that it was really important for the writers that this production be looking forward rather than looking back. There's a whole new generation of artists that are performing this piece than the artists who worked on it originally. And when we started working on it back in the 80s, in many ways, there was an element of nostalgia in the piece, because the three of us were reflecting on experiences we had, things that we had lived through as children, as teenagers, and that we brought all of that to the first production. And we spent an inordinate amount of time getting the cast to understand the period that this piece was originally, the period that Malcolm lived in. I would go off and do research at the Schomburg in New York City, bring in a lot of visual images for people, and that we were really trying to connect them with a very specific past. And we felt now it's like, it's too far away. It's ancient history in terms of how we process our past. And so it was really important for us to have a younger generation across the board deal with the piece and find what the piece was for them and to have them do that. And we really wanted to sit back and let that happen. And that's been a great opportunity for us that I don't think a lot of writers get to have. I mean, we were fortunate that we wrote this piece when we were so young, so that 35 years later, we're still around to see it have a new life in a new context.
That's wonderful, thank you. So Rickey and Ronnita being part of this new generation of artists who are interpreting this piece, Ronnita, you talked a little bit about that weight that comes with playing a real character, a character who's a real person. Are there other things that being part of this opera now have brought to you? So you performed it in Detroit. We're now doing it in Omaha. You'll do it in a whole rehearsal process and explore it again. Are there things that come up for you as you're in that space?
I mean, besides the weight of a very real and a very influential woman who was a very strong influence on then a very strong influencer of the world, that weight is always with me. I think as you're in the rehearsal process, you always learn new things, you see new things, you hear new things, something that you haven't done before. And there are times when parts of the music will actually come into my brain, parts of the libretto, when I'm, doing stuff, just regular stuff throughout the day, and I'm going, haha, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I was telling some of the castmates when Malcolm says, you need a holy name, a new name, like Amilcar, and I was in San Francisco. I'd never met an Amilcar in my life. But when I was in San Francisco, I got a Lyft, and the Lyft driver was Amilcar, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, okay, I have to tell you, your name. Okay. And I just launched into this conversation. I'm like, you have to look up this opera, you have to see this opera because I've never met an Amilcar, and your name is in this opera because this and this and this, and the reason why, they suggested, and he said that his parents had chosen that name because of the reasons that Malcolm said.
Oh, wow.
Yes, in the show.
All right, there you go.
That's amazing.
Which was amazing. So, you
That's
always, I think any artistic endeavor that you take on, you always have those parts of it with you, and you see that, is it life imitates art or art imitates life, or vice versa? Mm-hmm. Either way. Was that the question? Was it
Yeah.
I always sort of go off on tangents.
Sure,
great.
why not?
Sure.
I don't care if that was the question. That was fabulous.
Well, they're just these undercurrents
Yeah.
that are always there.
They're always there.
And then
Yeah.
sometimes you stumble upon them.
Yeah.
I'd like to add, in terms of choreography, weight seems negative in a tone, but for the choreography department, it's a celebration because I get to hope and celebrate and be joyful in what the Black body can look like in the future on the stage, especially a Black male. And so I get to embrace that, and it's a warm hug to my heart, so into my spirit, I should say. So it's the freedom of it that feels very free,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word, you know. So, when I'm thinking about the future, I'm like, yeah, black men can walk around the space and they can own the space in this way.
That's a good point. Somebody else said something to that effect about the freedom of being able to tell the story and inhabit that space in your body, and to let that story live through you to tell
That's right.
the story of a person who maybe wasn't as free as we are right now. That's a very good point.
Ricky, I want to talk a little bit more about...
Laura, don't ask me anything else.
We've got 30 more minutes.
I know, right?
I'm going to ask questions. They're going to ask questions.
Can you like, I'm just going to sit. No. What's going on? Go ahead.
I want to know what you feel like the role of dance is in this opera. Sometimes in opera we get those opera ballets that
Love
are
this.
in between acts and aren't really
That's right.
integrated, but the dance in this opera is a big deal.
Yeah, the dance it's a part of the DNA of the show.
Yep.
And it's because of the way Anthony wrote it.
Yep.
And I am so grateful to have that experience, or to be having this experience in real time, because sometimes in opera, traditionally in the world, it's just very like a byway thing, and it's very like thrown off, or it's secondary to the opera. But this one, we're ingrained in it, and so it's a real treat. And so I'm hoping that changes with the tradition of opera as we go forward in any other pieces, that people pay attention to this and come see it and go, oh, I didn't realize that dance could actually be infused in an opera in this sense, and not just have it be this transitional thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm learning so much just being up here with these two creative people, and it makes me look at the piece in different ways. Just earlier, I had a revelation about the role of Ella and how it brings us from a traditional opera language into a vernacular. And on the other end of that, it's the dance that takes us out of the vernacular and moves us back into a more abstract, modern space. Because there's a scene in a ballroom, and it is specifically not set to vernacular music. Because it's that part of the story is ending, and we're moving into another part of the story that is about broader issues. It's about, again, the resurfacing of racial violence. And it's not to be approached through vernacular. And it's the dance hall scene that brings us out of it. I mean, it's not in a traditional meter that social dance is in. And it brings you from there to the cops coming in.
Right.
I say they're niggas on the wrong side of town.
Right.
Boom.
Yeah.
And that can't be, or we don't want that expressed in vernacular. So she brings us into that vernacular world, and you take us out of it. And then there's a second moment in the opera, which is, we refer to as the riot, which is orchestrated music to be choreographed to. Always has been, always will be. That's your spot.
It's a sweet spot. Hard to count, okay?
Yeah. But then Ricky and Robert have brought dance into other elements of the show where it hadn't been so prominent before, particularly in terms of how it reveals the emotional life of young Malcolm in the first act. Is that you see his turmoil through Ricky's choreography. And it's a beautiful thing to watch.
Appreciate that.
Hey,
That just means you have to come and see it.
that's right.
Okay.
You must.
And we got the same little Malcolm that was in
Oh,
Detroit,
yay.
who's here,
Yeah.
who I don't think Ricky would have had the inspiration that he does have for
You're right.
that scene, if it weren't for how accessible dance is to this young performer.
He's so
Yeah,
lovely.
he's quite
He's
he's a superstar.
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
But it goes back to the answer to the question. My inspiration, like how I was going to move him, he was adaptable, he was pliable, and so he was, again, and forthcoming with what he wanted to do artistically. And all of us together, 6 of us together, figured it out and came up with something I think is quite beautiful, to be honest.
It's really touching. Like
Yeah.
the you have to come see it. The first part.
Yeah.
No, because it makes. I love dance, and I always think it should be. I think we've said this integrated into opera because I don't love the compartmentalization.
Yeah, you said that.
And it informs what someone else does informs what you do. And the first time that he crosses the stage, it's so hard to start that aria because I'm staring at him and I'm like, do not cry, do not cry. No, I have to tell myself,
Well,
do not
yeah.
cry because of the turmoil that this young child has just experienced and how he's able to just embody that in such a way. It's magnificent.
And what he does so well
Yeah,
is he watches.
he watches, as children do,
His children
as
did.
children do. Yeah,
Watch and learn.
yeah.
You talked about, what you're talking about is you're being influenced in a moment while you're performing. And one of the things that we talked about in this pre-talk is this opera has space for improvisation, which is not typical in this art form all the time. No. Okay. You don't agree. Great.
No,
Tell me
I
more.
agree. No, I agree. I mean, this
Yes.
is, and I'll let the pro speak on this.
Well, no. I'm no pro. I might be like really telling on myself. Yes, in a way you can improv some things that you do like physically or shading a word a different way or letting, let's say what your castmate does one night and you receive that communication. And so you say, you know what? Let me answer. Call and response, which is a very, very familiar thing in African American tradition. You respond to that energy. But improvisation wise, dramatically, yes. Musically, no. No. You gotta count.
Yeah, you
That's right. You gotta count.
You gotta count.
I think that more impacts the music behind the choreography
Yeah.
than the music behind the singers. I remember there was way back 1986 when we were at City Opera. We had, as we do here in Omaha, there's a small ensemble of improvisers that are dropped into the orchestra. And as we were in rehearsals for City Opera, the trombone player said, I need to see this scene in a monitor because I'm responding to what's happening on stage. Because he solos against the trauma that young Malcolm is having. And he says, I need to see it. And the other thing is that while the music that the singers have is all written out, the supporting instrumental elements underneath it come in part out of an improvised tradition. And so there are certain relationships between a specific player and a specific singer that are very important. And as we were working on the piece, and we were working on Ella's piece, what we needed, in fact, was a different bass player who could respond to what she was doing. And we found one, and then it took off for you.
It did, but yeah. Well, because I love bass. I'm very influenced by that. It's the heartbeat. It's the through line, and also I think with that, the bass line and the through line, it also brings the stability of who Ella was for Malcolm, because it was chaotic up until the point where she was like, all right, come live with me.
Yeah.
And she gives him that structure, which the new bassist gave me structure. So, you know, you can,
It's,
yeah.
It has
The
to
one
have
informs the other.
It has to have a warmth,
Yeah.
and it has to swing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Making it easy. I love it.
Well, I have plenty more questions. I have pages and pages. But I want to make sure, this is Opera in Conversation, so there's space for questions from our audience. So Rebecca is walking around with a microphone so we can make sure everybody can hear your question, but we'll open it up now to see if anybody in the audience has a question.
What you got?
We got one down here.
First of all, thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to your performance. I have a question about contemporary operas. One thing I seem to note is that although I might be attracted to the story or the subject matter, when I hear the opera, it almost all sounds like recitative, and I'm not hearing something I think of as an aria. So, you know, I'm not asking for something I'll go home and hum around the house, but can you tell me a little bit more about what we can expect melodically from this opera?
Ooh, there are a lot of singable parts.
I know.
I would say that there are traditional arias in this piece. I would say that there are quite singable parts in this piece, and that there are quite difficult, emotional arias in this piece, and that there's also a lot of interaction between the soloists and the ensemble to build a piece together. And there are moments in this piece where I believe that you will be moved by the music alone, by the music and the staging together, by the music, the staging, and the entire concept. And that, oddly enough, I think that one of the things that has held X back in terms of its acceptance is the fact that in many ways it is so traditional. That it is traditional in terms of the story. It's traditional in many ways in terms of how the music is used. And what was untraditional about it is the subject matter. And so that though sometimes people who embrace the subject matter didn't embrace the form, and sometimes people who embraced the form didn't embrace the subject matter. So I think that Anthony loves to say that one of his inspirations as an opera composer, and for X in particular, is Wagner. And it's there. And one of the inspirations for the piece is Fats Waller and Cab Calloway, and that's there. Part of the inspiration of the piece comes from like A Love Supreme, and that's there. And it's all Anthony at the end of the day. I hope that helps.
Hi, thanks so much for coming and speaking to us. I've been struck since hearing Ronnita mention her reaction to the libretto in daily life. You know, I'm somebody who came to opera slowly, and I used to like to go to the opera and just be surprised. But but then after a while, you start wanting to learn the lines because then you're ready. This is, so it's a kind of a long wind-up, but kind of an easy question. Do you have an expectation of the audience at all? Do you want them to be amazed, like it's a movie, some experience that just knocks you off your feet, or do you? I mean, oh my God, I'm speaking to the writer. Do you want us to study those lines?
Well, Tulani would, yeah.
I want all of you to answer this because I think this is a very personal expectation and choice.
Okay.
For me, I would like the audience to see their reality being recognized and presented on stage.
Beautiful.
In a conversation. Yes. Yes. That was it.
Well, I look forward to the libretto coming to me, because it's amazing. Thank you so much.
I'm always intrigued, that I always say Act 3 of any show, musical theater, because there's Act 1 and Act 2, but Act 3 is always the conversations after. I'm always intrigued by that. And in terms of expectations, I mean, he answered it for me. I think that's what it is, right on the head. And whatever they experience is what they're going to experience, because it varies on however they come into the piece and what they allow themselves to experience. You know what I mean? So me trying to put something on them, trying to make them feel something or to experience something, it's false. If it's inauthentic to you, then it's inauthentic to you. You know what I mean? So it has to just be in the moment and whatever happens. That would be my only expectation.
No expectations, just a hope of open-mindedness. You bought a ticket, so you're coming there hoping to have a good time or to be provoked or to see yourself reflected. With any show, I never have any expectations, just the hope that the audience will come along with us. And art is to start conversations, provoke feelings of joy, discomfort, the gamut of human emotions. And I hope that people come to recognize the humanity of these people whose story we are telling again, and to see imperfect beings on stage telling the story of imperfect beings, and just embracing that, embracing the humanity of everything.
Okay, there's one more thing. Maybe I do have an expectation.
Yeah?
Right. That they I think leave inspired. And what I mean by that is like, so that evokes some type of action thereafter. Just action in general. Be it a conversation, be it doing something physical, be it more involvement, be it involved, whatever that means for them. But I think for them to take a step forward in their life.
Right. Well, I guess for me, I would like the audience to be prepared to go on a journey and to trust us that at the end, you will be okay.
That's a big trust, to trust that we'll be okay at the end.
We'll be okay.
Yeah. I will highlight that we do have one of these opera and conversations that intentionally happens after the performance, on the Tuesday following the performance. We'll be back here at the Benson Theater to make space for those conversations. We want you to come back after the show and talk about your experience and be in that space. So I'll invite You're all welcome to stay in Omaha. I know you have other things, but we'll be back here on November 8th, and I invite you for that third act where we talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm someone who goes primarily for the music, so
Cool.
I have a simple question. Will there be a full orchestra?
Yes.
Okay, and what percentage of the opera is dance?
Percentage.
Can I ask that?
You presented that. Ooh.
Because I love the music, that's what I
Well, okay.
So, and then also, usually the music takes primary place over the story for me. So maybe this is reversed in this opera. I don't know. Just a few ideas.
Okay.
Interesting.
Let's say that the opera is more than the libretto. The opera is the score. And the score includes everything in the libretto and more. And a lot of that more is the choreography. A lot of that more is the combination of all the elements working together. And that, yeah, it's a theatrical experience. Does that help?
I think that's the beauty of opera that we've talked about, is this idea that it does come together and combine all of these elements coming together to make something really fantastic and magical and a full experience that without the other elements, it's not the full experience. It's that way because it is all of those disciplines coming together
Yeah.
to create
It's
one
Wagner's
thing.
Wagner's word, Gesamtkunstwerk. It's the sum of the parts.
Right.
It's, I mean, yes, if you're primarily listening for the music, great, enjoy that, because there are many different styles to enjoy. If you're primarily focused on the poetry and the libretto, some deep stuff going on. If you're focused on dance, there is something for everyone to really focus on. In terms of ratios, like percentage-wise, that's kind of hard to nail down.
Ooh.
We hope that you'll enjoy the total, like a cake.
Yeah.
So just the eggs or just the butter, just the flour. We hope you'll enjoy the whole thing.
Right.
Yes.
There was a moment in Detroit when Robert was first staging it, and he was primarily staging off the libretto. And so that there were sections of music that didn't really make sense to him. And he would say, well, can you get rid of that? And being that the composer was still alive,
Hey, man. Yeah.
the response was, no.
No.
And no for a couple of reasons. One is that at that moment, that another art form is carrying the load, choreography. Another thing is that Anthony would say, I'm creating a musical vocabulary here, and I am introducing motifs here that reappear later, and that there is an emotional connection in when those motifs appear, because emotionally you should be connecting those two moments. And if this music isn't here now, establishing that vocabulary, you won't have the payoff at the end. How's that?
So I guess 50%.
I guess you
I'll
should
get
get
that.
paid more, right?
That's right.
We're talking percentage here. I don't know. You have to talk to Kurt about that.
Interesting.
I have a question about the production. It seems that a lot of current opera is monochromatic in the production values, the lighting, the costuming, the sets, lots of, just monochromatic. Could you talk a little bit about the production values, the lighting, the costuming?
Sure.
I'm really curious about that. Thank you.
When this piece was first performed at City Opera in 1986, the concept was indeed minimalist. I mean, it had chairs, it didn't have much. This time, we have a creative team that is bringing all of the resources of contemporary theatrical production to this piece. And the writers were stunned, amazed, and thrilled at the scale, the thought, and the power of this production. How's that?
Not monochromatic.
Not far from.
Not
Well,
monochromatic.
the concept of the show, conceptually wise, Robert O'Hare, the director, Afrofuturism, and if you don't know what that is, if it's literature, art, music, whatever it is, which is an art form that is then projected and seen with a future lens, with something like science that heightens it, but told with the African American diaspora. So that's what it is. So while the music feels like it's giving traditional opera, the vision of it is actually much brighter, because what he is saying is that what does the black body look like if Malcolm was still alive today? And so that's the whole idea. So when you see all these projection and these lights, it may be confusing, but if you don't understand what Afrofuturism is, then you're left confused. And I think there's a little description, I think maybe in the program, I'm not sure. Hey, Kurt! No, I'm kidding, I'm not gonna do that.
I can tell you where to find that.
Oh, great.
So if you want to learn more, we put together a study guide that has information that's shared with all of the students who are coming to our student dress rehearsal, but it's also available on our blog. And so if you are the type of opera goer who wants to do all the research before you come in, there's a 20-page study guide available on our website. If you go to operaomaha.org and go to our blog page, you can find the study guide there, and there is an article in that study guide specifically about Afrofuturism and how it influenced this production.
Yeah.
We have time for one more short-ish question.
Make it a good one.
Make it a good one.
No pressure.
Make it a good one. I'll say it too, make it a good one.
You scared them all, everybody.
I scared them.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
All right, then I will ask my last question. We've talked about a lot of things. You've shared a lot of creative secrets. I appreciate that, just for this
really
audience.
Appreciate it.
So, is there one thing that we haven't talked about yet? I'm going to ask each of you to answer this, that you really want this audience, when they come to see the show, that you want them to think about or look for or listen for, that's really special to you?
I kind of answered that earlier, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that. I think that's
Great.
From my work. I don't know. I try not to put too much pressure on like what the audience thinks. They need to experience. Because if I do my work with considering the audience, but I also know that art is subjective. So it's whatever it is that you're going to take from it. It is what it is, and whatever you take, be it negative and or positive, it still evokes a conversation, which is the point of art.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note for us to close on this conversation. I want to thank our fabulous artists once again for sharing their time with us this evening, for sharing their insights, and getting us excited about this opera that we're going to see in just a few weeks. And we're grateful for you being here. So, and thank you all for being here and your fabulous, thoughtful, insightful questions for this conversation. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Just a reminder, we will be back next week with the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation for a panel exploring Malcolm X and his connections and context here in Omaha. We did speaker prep for that this morning, and it's going to be a really wonderful conversation. So I hope we'll see you back next week. You have flyers with all of the things that are happening for this opera, so we're excited to see you at those. We're excited to see you at the opera. Thank you all for being here. Have a fabulous night, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Good night. I'll be signing autographs right outside the door.
I just want to sit here and speak in the mic.
Until they turn it off.
I do.
Right.
Can I? Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming. Get home safely.
Come on,
Nice.
right on cue.
I love it. I want one of these.